Our final presentation this afternoon, the title is Women Warriors and the Fight for Nation in Vietnamese and Palestinian Film. We are joined by Lan Duong, who is Associate Professor in Cinema and Media Studies at the University of Southern California. She is the author of Treacherous Subjects, Gender, Culture, and Trans-Vietnamese Feminism. Dr. Duong's second book project, Transnational Vietnamese Cinemas and the Archives of Memory, examines the modes of memory and critique in Vietnamese and Vietnamese diasporic films. Welcome, Dr. Duong. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Tell you stories instead. Part of what we do as this collective that Layla Sharif and I are, and it's called the Critical Refugee Studies Collective, is that we focus on feminist refugee epistemologies, knowledge productions or the production of knowledge by storytellers, refugee storytellers, and we give credence to refugee subjectivities and stories and their histories. So I begin with this story, and this is not to elicit any sympathy, but to pull from it the irony. My father died last night in the US. He was a refugee from the Vietnam War. He would have loved to be here. Devout Catholic. I bring that up because I had already been grieving before I came here, but being in Palestine really makes me feel like I'm a part of a collective grief. My father was a refugee. He was a lieutenant lieutenant colonel in the South Vietnamese Army. Had we not left in 1975, he would have been re-educated by the communist government. So I come to you as a refugee. I come to you as a refugee scholar, feminist, poet, and I wanted to speak about two things before this presentation, if it ever comes up. But I will speak about revolutionary filmmaking as well. Two images is that where I grew up in San Jose, California, my father had his flag, his Southern Vietnamese flag. It was a meat of a flag, triangular, yellow on red. He kept it there throughout my childhood. And I'm thinking that for him, perhaps it was an object of shame. For me, it was a link to his memories. Second image is of him being sent to the morgue today. I watched it through WhatsApp, through my sister's phone. And there was a trail of weeping women. He was taken care of by women most of his life, even though he was a very masculine kind of person. Such images, such sentiments really are part of this presentation. I want to talk about memory, whose memories are being erased. If the end of the Vietnam War and its 50th year anniversary in 2 years is coming up, I want to ask whose memories will be erased, whose memories will be remembered and disremembered. The Vietnamese state will not remember the Southern Vietnamese refugees. There is an ongoing erasure of that history in films, in schools. There's also an erasure by the U.S. state, where the U.S. state doesn't recognize the losers of that war. And there is, all the while, so much normalization, whatever the hell that means, in terms of economics and trade. I'm so sorry for the delay. Thank you for your patience. I'll try to be quick.
you so much. Yay! Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Critical Refugee Studies Collective that I began with, and this is a collective that is 9 people strong, and we advocate for seeing refugees as human beings, and we advocate for the flooding of refugee stories. We begin with stories, we end with stories, and we ask that for us to be critical, we need to look and listen closely to refugee stories in their mode of speaking and storytelling. And the kinds of questions we ask are, what are the desires and needs of the forcibly displaced? What of the joy and survival practices that play out in the domain of the everyday? And the decolonial strategies that are part of this collective's work is to uncover the histories of colonialism and imperialism that precede and shadow forced migration. And it is to critique nation states and their claims to sovereign borders. I mentioned earlier feminist refugee epistemology, and this is a focus on the unseen, the unspectacularized, and looks to the private sphere as that gendered space that is expressive of love and grief, but also of creative, improvised, and experimental refugee-making practices. Now, so I'm going to go straight to the presentation about Vietnamese and Palestinian revolutionary films and put together for you this threading of histories of colonialism and imperialism and the struggles for liberation, this and what Layla and I have done in terms of co-writing this piece is to talk about the figure of women in these films as representative of both the suffering and the resilience of the people of Vietnam and Palestine. This juxtaposition allows us to connect very concretely the solidarities between Vietnam and Palestinian, but then also the discontinuities of this juxtaposition at the same time. So if on the one hand I'm threading together these histories, on the other hand I'm moving to unravel them. And how I unravel these these shared struggles and histories is the way that Vietnam and Palestine today are very violently remembered and disremembered differently by US and Israeli state regimes. So we use this mode called critical juxtaposition, and we borrow from Yen Le Espiritu in the way in which she seemingly puts together disconnected events, communities, and histories. And this is very key to this mode of analysis, is that to illuminate what would otherwise not be visible, the contours, the contents, and the afterlives of war and empire. So in putting Palestine and Vietnam in juxtaposition, in tandem, the critique is of US empire and Zionist ideology, the problems of militarism and occupation. The other point of this paper is to focus on what is often not figured in academic discourse as much, but as the panel so ably talked to, is this global South-South solidarity and the mode of thinking and writing together that I think is so important for the ways in which we assert ourselves within academia as a collaborative feminist mode of producing knowledge together. And so we highlight the intersecting colonial histories and the forms of resistance that have historically been activated in Vietnam and Palestine. So I'd like to just pause for a minute in order to talk about how, as discursive signifiers, Vietnam and Palestine circulate, however, in profoundly unequal terms. They constitute different visual markers for US empire. And I have to say, it must be said that Vietnam has been memorialized as having been successfully developed 50 years after the Vietnam War had ended, and geopolitically integrated within the larger international economy, while Palestine has been discursively and materially vanished in order to sustain the U.S.'s special relationship with Israel. And that is a quote from Leila Sharif. But I want to, even given that, I want to talk about this history of Palestine and Vietnam. There have been official diplomatic relations between North Vietnam and PLO starting in '68. The PLO established an office in Hanoi, and then there was embassy status in 1982. Vietnam officially recognized Palestine, and the relationship of the diplomatic ties have been strong from then to now. And in the past, what Vietnam means to African, Latin American, and countries and Palestine has been this very strong decolonial movement, a history of decolonization that had inspired other third world nations to also revolt and start the process of decolonization. And so Evanlay Espiritu Gandhi has argued that Palestinian fighters and activists have drawn inspiration from the communist Viet Cong forces. The two groups shared similar political rhetoric and a means of resistance. Palestinian fighters referred to their conflict as a second Vietnam or Arab Hanoi. So these films made in the 60s and 70s have served as weapons of culture, and that is from Joseph Massad, in which an indigenous critical non-capitalist mode of visualizing and narrativizing anti-colonial struggles from the perspective of the oppressed. It's powered by a cinematic language that's influenced by the Soviet Union in the 1920s and shaped by third cinema in the 1960s more generally. And we focus on film feminism. What that means is we are not looking at women directors and filmmakers necessarily, but we look at the representations of women in these films. And what we found is that the trope of everyday life and the maternal body are so important in forwarding this notion of decolonization, of a struggle against imperialism and militarism, so that the revolutions are actually rooted in the space of the home and the maternal body. The home is not a site of domesticity, but of revolutionary thought and action. The home, and I speak as a reformed Western feminist, is not the space of submission or subordination. Instead, the home is where, again, revolutionary thought takes place. So we understand revolutionary feminism as ongoing and vexed and relational. And so I want to bring into play a film called Chi Tu Hậu. Done in 1962, this scene is of a woman who's just been raped by a South Vietnamese soldier. She goes to the beach and she's holding a baby, and she will breastfeed her. And it's important for us to see the ways in which she embodies the nation in gestation at this very important moment in Vietnamese history. Sorry, the volume's not great. Now she goes to the beach to actually commit suicide.
So from here on, she will join the guerrilla army to be a counterinsurgency during the war against the French and then the Americans. Now, so there is also another strain that links the two kinds of films together, and that is these expressions of solidarity. And thanks to Leila, she brought this piece in order for us to make up our film analysis. And so They Do Not Exist came out in 1974, and what I wanted to capture from this is the way in which in intertitles we have very strong statements in connecting African countries with Vietnam, with Palestine. And I end this paper, and so with that ending for They Do Not Exist, that's how the final segments are presented through this visual language of very simple intertitles. The film is available to watch on YouTube, and I really highly recommend it. There is also, which I didn't talk about, is this celebration of the everyday and of womanhood in terms of making life livable. And I want to end on that because to go back to the two images that I began with my stories, and because I believe in a storytelling practice that expresses a kind of radical vulnerability in order for us